Hi there, and welcome to the Dentro Talent podcast. I am here with Andrew Grier, and we are going to be talking about something a little bit different today for the Dentro Talent podcast. We are going to be talking about the internal talent acquisition function and external partners or agency relationships. So, Andrew, nice to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out to have a chat.
Then,
And look, I think it's quite important for us to give some context and some a little bit of background. Obviously, I'm kind of 20 odd years agency side in technology recruitment. So just give us a really quick rundown of your career in recruitment and TA.
yeah, no problem. Like you, 20 odd years, in fact 24 to be almost exact in terms of recruitment, and half of that has been, first half, 12 years being agency, consultancy side, where I grew up in recruitment, if you like, get a taster of interim, contract placements, permanent placements, international, global tech. So quite a broad sphere of things through that. But then moved in-house. First in-house job was with an organisation called Circle at the time, about 120,000 strong, recruitment manager there. That's where I started to learn the whole in-house and ways of working in terms within a business rather than doing that kind of agency style recruitment. So yeah, 12 years, and I've done a mix of permanent and interim work there. If I've got any pattern in my work history, is several of the permanent jobs I've had actually started as an interim consultant contractor. So main niche being that kind of build and fix of talent acquisition, but I do work in broader HR as well. So very industry agnostic as well. I've operated in, Circle's a good example where that was everything from public sector, local authority contracts, working and hiring for everything from central office functions, so your HR, IT, tech, but then we operated in prisons, airspace, and globally on that basis. But then I've moved through financial services, Mondelez, so some of the biggies in terms of like chocolate with Cadbury's, In Touch Games, so iGaming, online, bingo.
Yeah.
So very broad industry sectors as well. And as I said, being that kind of mix of interim and permanent, I've saw lots of different environments, lots of different ways of working, including the subject matter that we're going to come on to today, various versions of that, all the way through COVID. So yeah, lots to talk, lots of opinion, lots of facts, and lots of detail that we can often share on that.
Yeah, and I think lots of learned behaviours, patterns that you see on both sides of the fence, I'd imagine. And similarly, my experience in agency recruitment, it's always been in tech, but it's been across various different sectors. I think a really good place to start on this topic is to give some of the history on it, because I remember my first few years in agency in the early 2000s, and I think it's safe to say, and I'm sure you would have seen this and experienced this, it's safe to say that talent acquisition functions weren't quite what they are today, and they were viewed by recruiters as blockers to a process, and it was almost a case of trying not to speak to those people almost until the deal was done, until you'd placed somebody. And that's obviously kind of from years gone by created that animosity, if you like, between the two, if we can call it sides, the two sides.
Yeah. The exact same experience, and even having come from that agency side, you did have mentors and people training and developing you then as to how to bypass these gatekeepers, wasn't it? It was like how to get past the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
That could be everyone from the starting at the kind of maybe a receptionist or some description right through to avoiding HR, avoiding people. get direct to the hiring manager who's got the issue and the problem. And that still exists. In my experience, I've saw it, quite recently, people bypassing. But many on the agency consultancy side have evolved with that change, and they're becoming a little bit more solutions driven and collaborative, and forming the kind of, maybe not overused, it still applies, that partnerships, being that kind of, we want to be an extension of your in-house team. And while that's, maybe considered sometimes overused, it's not, it's still appropriate, and it's still the right approach to take. In my view, it's the one that works the strongest. But you do still get elements of people will go straight to hire a manager, and it's getting that balance as to how do you encourage that level of interaction, because the hiring manager's the one with the problem, they need that interaction too. So I think it's, there's an evolution happening, but some of there's many still stuck in the early 2000s and maybe even earlier, so some are still to change. Not everyone needs to. There's probably a market and a space for all the different tactics depending on who you're approaching, which organisation, but similar experience. It's but changes are happening.
And if I look way back to kind of my client base in those early years, invariably it was the hiring point of contact, as in a CTO or a head of a department or something like that. And if I look at my client base and the people I talk to now, I still talk to those people, but it's always as a precursor to, okay, now we need to talk to the talent acquisition team or a director of talent acquisition, something like that. And I think that transition, from my experience, probably started about 10 or so years ago, maybe a little bit more, where TA functions started to become more developed, and actually, added value to the process and the hiring process. So where do you feel that relationship is now, from what you've seen and what you've experienced going into different businesses and different sectors? Where do you feel we are on that journey of TA and agencies kind of working together and in perfect harmony?
Perfect harmonies, it does happen. I reckon there's many getting that right. It depends on who you speak to and where you look. But it's back to that kind of where some are still changing and growing into how it should be. I think maybe where we're at is very mixed, maybe even to the extent of 50-50, with a bias towards, if there is a slight increase in some that get it, and when I say some that get it, I mean agency side that get it in terms of they need to be more consultative and more partnership focused, but not all. And like I said earlier, there is a market for everything, but I think it's kind of almost cyclical. It's come full circle where when I first started the agency side, I reckon the recruitment was strong then from an agency perspective, because just like you've mentioned there, was in-house has grown, in-house has developed, and that's why I get into it at the point I did. I felt I wanted to shift away from the kind of the sales elements and the target chasing elements of agency side to move in-house and place people and learn more about how the internal functions of a larger organisation operated. So I think it's changing. I couldn't describe where we're all at now, because everybody seems to be at different stages, and there's still elements of big organisations even still out there who don't have a fully fledged or fully mature in-house team. So there's still scope and capacity for agencies to dip in and out of those on demand. But I have seen post-COVID, it's almost like we've come full circle, but not just towards the agency side of things. That there's been a rise of RPO, and RPO brings a closer collaboration and a signed-up deal in terms of a longer-term relationship that you're committed to. So I would say that's the kind of where we're at now. There's the rise of, come out of COVID, where a lot of businesses realise that in-house function pretty much a lot of places, we were the first to go. It was we're not hiring, why do we need these hirers? Why do we need the people who manage our hiring process? So there was this kind of redundancies and layoffs and everything happening, which still happens now. There's still some sort of kind of hangover from that still occurring in-house teams. But the activity around that now, I'm seeing the changes are more around, not that they don't need them, businesses are shifting to, and quite rightly so, a more contingency, slightly ad hoc model to accommodate their peaks and troughs. So I think that's where we're at. There's a rise of agency RPO style supply on a more contingency ad hoc basis because organisations are realising that what if the global pandemic or something else similar happens, we need to be able to scale up really quickly and then scale back down without having to maybe go through the pain of redundancies. And so it's understanding where your business is at, scooping in some sort of scope around how do we demand these peaks and troughs. So I think the in-house model's changed dramatically as well, quite significantly in lots of places where in-house teams are smaller. Not everywhere, some have still got the bigger in-house teams and it's cost effective and efficient for them because they've maybe got a steady business growth or a model that they can do that on. I think many are now starting to realise that they want to just be able to dip in and out. So an RPO, for example, or an agency supply chain model, you don't need a full RPO. You could have a mixed bag of suppliers, who can do you that peak and trough. And that's where the C-suites and the CFOs of the world are starting to think, right, okay, I want that kind of model because reputationally it's strong as well. We don't go a big dip in business and hiring and then have to lay off half your in-house team because it's an overhead. So yeah, I think that's where we're at, and I think the relationships are changing on that basis as well. Some are getting it, some are not. But the relationships have become much closer, and I think the lines between in-house, RPO, pure agency are all very blurred now. It's very much a similar skill set when you look at every level. Whether it's like hands-on 360 recruiter through to the leadership within TA, recruitment, resourcing, whatever we want to call it. There's slight adjustments, slight tweaks to what we do, but across the board, no matter which market or which supply type you're in, RPO, agency, in-house, and then I'm kind of making just there's three, maybe there's other versions of those models. The lines are blurred. Yeah. Our skills are all pretty much the same. Relationships, empathy, and then the business commercial mindset as well, and bringing all those things together. We're all very similar beasts.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. From your experience, and if you think back to some of the businesses that you've worked in, what does a healthy kind of TA external partner agency relationship look like, and when does it really work well? I know you've already mentioned that kind of partnership, but just define that. Just define that a little bit more.
Okay, I'll try. I think mostly it's built on relationships. It's built on trust, competence, and a good signed commercial deal. That's where it works, because you do then have, if you've got two-way agreed, sensible, mature, achievable SLAs, so agreements and ways of working together, common sense, all that mixed formula of things, that's where it works, and it needs to be beneficial to all as a commercial decision, but overall I think that kind of built on trust and built on communication is similar to running any manager or leader, anybody who's got a team of people, particularly in this kind of modern. Well, that's a different podcast in terms of working from home versus the drive back to the office. But that kind of work, we're working with people remotely, and a lot of that's built on trust as well and maturity. and working with people. And I think that's at the centre, certainly from my perspective. That's the ones that work, the ones where you get a good relationship with your supplier. And they do become that cheesy, an extension of your in-house model. Good RPOs tend to be quite often, what's the term, white labelled, if you like, where it's your business don't really even understand, or don't not understand, but they're not aware fully that there is a difference between your in-house team and your other supply chain, because you work so well together. They don't really, the lines get blurred again. So yeah, I think that's the part that works best.
Yeah, and I think
Sorry.
that trust piece is just that's like A1 for me. That's got to be there. And you mentioned communication and that engagement with suppliers and being able to articulate, and have regular updates with them, because there's nothing from an agency recruiter. There's nothing worse than a process which starts and then you end up trying to chase people and kind of get things moving, and there's a lack of communication from an end client. There is literally nothing. There's nothing worse than that. And what about how do you use, and how have you used agency partners to support your kind of wider goals as a TA function? So I'm thinking about things like diversity, looking at kind of data reporting, EVP. How have you engaged an agency to support, not necessarily develop those things, because I think that is perhaps best coming from in-house, but how have you used them to make sure that message to market is consistent and they're on board with your ED&I message?
Yeah, that's a pretty key challenge, because it's like that partnership and trust, but it's that close collaboration. It's letting them get so close to your business that historically for an in-house team that would be uncomfortable, because you think you're then maybe getting land grabbed. You can maybe, so that's where the trust part comes in as well, but they do need to be able to integrate fully, and that's why I would even suggest that back to those old days where in-house teams were getting really annoyed and irritated by recruiters, even the ones that they were working with, going direct to hiring managers. That needs to be supported. They need to be able to have those direct hiring manager conversations. And I think for me, some of the models that have worked best are those ones where it's back to the trust, but you're enabling your suppliers to get close enough to understand and deliver the best solutions to every hiring manager that you can. And often that's around allocation in the right appropriate manner. In other words, your in-house team might be the best people at hiring your permanent placement type functions in IT or finance, for example. Actually, I would flip that. Your in-house team are typically best at your kind of broader business, general day-to-day, and I'm not being too, this is just my experience where I've lived it. Whereas your supply chain and things like finance, IT are really good examples of where more often than not you're best to have an agency supply, because you've got a recruiter all day, every day, talking to IT or finance type candidates and people, whereas your in-house team need to quite often, unless you're a bigger team, be a little bit more generalist and broad in their day-to-day recruitment and hiring functionality. So you need to be able to kind of dip into almost any function in the business and be able to manage or support your agency supply, to inform them enough that they can then go and do that kind of heavier lifting on that day-to-day, and they'll be more connected to the candidates that you need to grow an in-house team to the size that you need to cover every skill set. And let's talk in bigger organisations, because it's maybe more relevant to this topic in terms of that, because agency supply in a smaller organisation, you might not have an in-house team at all. So it's a different model again, it just depends. So I think definitely it's about that allocation and working in your best speciality or your niche with your in-house team, being a little bit more generalist, but also being vendor managers to be able to have those relationships with the suppliers and your specialists delivering the best they can for the business, because that's what they do all day, every day. So I don't know whether I've steered away from the point that you were asking me, but I think for me that's the kind of model that seems to have been working in recent years, certainly, that I would recommend, is to figuring out what you're good at in-house, having your in-house team right-sized to the best of its ability as to what they can cope with on demand, looking at the forward business plan in the hiring and workforce planning. If you get any strategic workforce planning that comes out of that, I don't know anybody, bar maybe one or two, that I've saw doing that really well. It's one of the most difficult things to achieve. If you can get all those details together, you can build your in-house team appropriately, and your supply chain, whether it be RPO or a bundle of people specialising in the tough to fill stuff. That's their job. That's where they add value. Again, slight opinion, but it's a measured commercial opinion. If they can add value in a specialist area, way better than your in-house team, that's where the relationship's really strong, because they're consistently getting hires to make. So they're benefiting both from being, engaged, busy, and paid well, for the model that they're in. And that lets your in-house team concentrate on the kind of broader EVP projects, DE&I. And then on that subject in particular, when that's developed, your EVP translates to your employer brand, which you tell everybody, but then that translates to your more authentic talent brand, which is the front line of what people say about you, really, the more truthful version of brand an employer says. And I think you need supply, they need to be able to understand that. So it's back to the beginning of what I was saying around close engagement, let them integrate with the business, let them understand what the culture, what you like, your overarching culture, your micro cultures, because your IT department will have a different culture than your finance department, as well your HR and your different frontline areas, whatever industry you're in. All those micro cultures need to be taken into consideration, which is why you need your supply chain to understand, and they don't need to know every microculture in your business, but if they focus with the managers that they're working with, I believe that's the kind of best formula for success in this that I would suggest at this point in time. That evolves. If you'd asked me that same question before COVID, I'd have given you a completely different answer as to how we'd model that out.
Yeah, and I think there is a tendency, and maybe this is in kind of SMEs and smaller organisations. Maybe there is a tendency, and I've certainly seen it in my agency life. There's a tendency to get a job spec and push that out to the suppliers that you've got terms agreed with no real upfront engagement, no kind of SLAs around, not necessarily delivery, but no SLAs around data and reporting, and giving people a view of, okay, these are the things that as a business we are interested in, and these are the things we want to know about our recruitment process. So, how many people did you reach out to? What were the reasons that they weren't interested? And I think there's almost a perception that agencies aren't there to provide that kind of data. Agencies are there just to get the job filled and get your fee and get on to the next one, kind of thing. But I think more and more agency recruiters want to provide that value. They want to provide the genuine value that perhaps was lacking in yesteryear. But some businesses miss a trick by not engaging their external partners on on their EVP. So get that consistent message to the market about where the business is going, and create that positive noise, because a recruiter is going to go out and talk to 30, 40, 50 people about a particular business. You need to make sure that what's being said is on message, right,
Mhm.
and elevates your brand in the market.
Yeah.
I've heard horror stories, and I'm sure you have before. I'm sure you've experienced it firsthand, where a candidate will turn up to an interview and say, in fact, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. A candidate turned up for interview and said, what are the greenfield projects that I'm going to be working on? And they were like, well, there's no greenfield projects. This is kind of a redevelopment of a feature.
Mhm.
And the interview was completely wasted, because the recruiter had given one message and the reality of it was completely different. So it's really important for businesses, whether you have a mature TA function or not, to, I think, use agencies to the best of their ability, and set high expectations. I think it's easy to set a low bar for an external partner and just say, just give me some CVs.
Yeah, I
And I think
completely agree.
you don't get the best out of it.
No, I completely agree. And I would actually, speaking even from a personal perspective, I would typically always go straight to my agency supply to ask them what's happening in the market. Probably most often when there's a problem, when you can't hire or
Yeah.
consistently losing a certain skill set in your sector, and you can't hire in a certain geography or a certain region, and your in-house team may have tried, your preferred agency's tried and given you feedback, we can't get any, and then so you bring in additional supply, you maybe open it up a little bit. I've had those challenges previously, and getting that feedback, the data, particularly that mix of both numbers, like you're saying, we've approached 300 people, and they're all, this is when you start to get your kind of benchmark salary knockbacks, where you're thinking, actually, we're not paying enough, and the simple stuff. Then you get the kind of slightly more anecdotal conversational data back saying there's a bad reputation of the business. You might have a great reputation generally, but you might have pockets where it's like, no, the market is a little bit incestuous over there, and everybody knows there's a problem there. That's why you can't hire in that particular location, whether that be a region or a branch, in a certain type of industry, whatever it is. You can start to see the anomalies start to raise out. But that data is super important, and it comes from mostly that mix of your in-house team, but your agency supply as well, because they're at the front line and they know the market. And if anything, people will actually be potentially more honest with a recruiter from an agency side than they will actually, with your in-house recruiters. Don't know why that is. Maybe it's human nature, or that kind of, don't want to offend you in any way, but your business is awful in that location. It's the feedback that you need, and I think that is back to that point around adding value in your niche market and being so close to the market. And I think in-house recruiters can do that, but they do have other in-house functionality and jobs to do in terms of their own workload. So if you're kind of spreading out your agent supply and they're specialists in their area and they're giving you that data, market analysis, competitor analysis, telling you, well, nobody's going to go for that. But always with that caveat around ensuring that they're, because I have seen that the flip side of it, where agencies have, not for a while right enough, but where agencies are feeding you data that's making you raise the salary, which raises their fee, which increases, and it becomes a kind of a recruiter agency-led market where they're kind of controlling it. That's happened. I've saw it twice, I think, in my career so far. But I'd say 95% of the time, good agency will give you that data, market analysis, competitor analysis, the numbers, how many they're approaching, and feed that back to you to help inform your decisions, then go back to the business, re-benchmark, change the job spec, as we quite often we will go to market with this unachievable target, and that includes on the diversity side as well. So if your data's telling you that you're wanting X number of hires have got to be a certain demographic, whether that be an ethnicity, gender, anything at all, and the data's telling you that that's an almost unachievable target, you need to pay attention to that as well. So not just diversity for diversity's sake. Diversity, in my view, should naturally happen if you're going to market in the right pattern, attracting the right audience and getting the right skill sets, and have the right culture within your business. Yes, you can put lots of tools and ways of working, and do the right thing is my mantra. Just do the right thing, regardless of whatever it is. And diversity should just happen. But sometimes those diversity targets are almost impossible because your demographic doesn't exist. There's no maybe mix in a certain location, or you don't pay the right way for the certain various elements to that can give you more problems. But back to the point, your agency data and feeding that back, that is true added value alongside the true niche market expertise, and that being able to integrate and understand your culture and give you the candidates that are of a high quality, and the ones that people describe as being maybe stickier, that stay longer as well. Quite often it's, if you can analyse your data and figure out your source of candidates, maybe your agency supplies maybe staying longer because maybe they've understood better the culture and the hiring manager and the fit because they're more closely engaged with them, and that's fine. So that's the model you need in terms of in-house do what they do, your agency supply do what they do as well.
Yeah. And have you ever set expectations around agency selection processes and kind of first stage interviews that an agency should be doing with a candidate, or do you see that as part of the trust and part of that niche market specialism, that they understand it and that they get it, or would you say to an agency, we want you to screen people with this kind of view or this eye?
Both. Some scenarios you need to trust. That's their day job. They know what they're doing, and as much as we should. It depends on speed and pace, because sometimes if you get something that's really urgent, and you trust your supply, if that individual or team that's working on that vacancy, for example, we can just say to them, look, this is really urgent. We don't need you to go. You might not need to go through such an extensive pre-screening interview type process. If you could just get over the ones that you already know in the market, and then we'll together work on figuring out what's the process look like. So that happens in ad hoc in terms of urgency, pace, costs, whatever else is thrown in to challenge that. But typically, yes, I would say it's better if they've got a structured pre-screening process, including most of the time it should be a conversational interview that they're conducting to get the basics and build some sort of picture that they can then discuss either with your in-house recruiter to then discuss with the hiring manager, or directly as a hiring team, your in-house recruiter, vendor manager, plus your agency, plus your hiring manager. Whoever's involved in that, and that's scalable. Because if you get at the front line where you're maybe hiring hundreds of people a month into the same skill and sort of volume recruitment, then that's different again. You will have more of maybe a slightly, I'm going to say paper-based, but be digitally based measurement, maybe some test functionality that the recruiters might use, or that volume piece, to get them through. But I'm still a believer in, I love AI, I love the bots, I love the chat bots, they're evolving, that's becoming fantastic. But at some point there does need to be a human conversation, so we can't dehumanise everything. that's evolving, that's changing as well. But I think, yeah, long answer to a great question, but I think it's quite subjective. I don't think it depends on the role that's been hired, the different urgency that's in that, the speed, the pace. But I would expect as much of an effort put in terms of pre-screening and interviewing and a structure to that, even some level of scorecarding, good old HR fashion, measurement that tells us, look, here's what we're putting forward to you, here's why, what do you think, have we got it right, have we got it wrong. It should be, over time, have become that they're getting it right every time, but that's partly building up that relationship and understanding. Back to that integration.
Yeah, and the best recruitment campaign that I think I've ever been involved in was upfront video screens by us as a recruitment agency, 100% trust that we were going to put the right people in front of them, and then we would book interview days based on our interview of that candidate. And we ended up with a success rate that was around 45% of the people that they interviewed were offered a position. Didn't all accept it, but they got to that point. So in terms of the value that was being added, it was a significant time saving for the internal TA team, but also the hiring managers, because they didn't need to review 20 CVs and whittle that down to 3 to interview. It was right, here are people that are fully pre-screened, they've gone through our set interview, and we believe they're the right type of people for that business. And again, I think it's just about knowing that agency recruiters are capable of doing that, and really kind of getting the most out of that external partner. Talking about getting the most out of them, last question for you is how have you measured the kind of return on investment and the value that external partners have to the business that you're in?
But first of all, I love your example of that, because that's there's still a lot that happens a lot of places, but still a lot that's aspirational for lots of businesses in terms of reaching that level, that level of trust. And when I say that, with not just with the business but with the hiring managers, it can be a real challenge to get your internal colleagues, hiring managers, to actually trust an in-house team to that level to say, right, we trust you, we'll always put the right people forward, we will just go straight to interview. We don't need to see the CV, we trust that you've done all that work. So love that. And that's where that kind of integration and collaboration and communication thing really, really works fantastically. In terms of measuring that added value, it comes in various shapes around what is your priority data. Is it the commercial element? Is it I mentioned stickiness of candidates? Is it where are the quality points that you want to measure? So there'll be some level of human quality measure, the relevance of the candidates, the applications, the ratios. So there might be some percentage ratios around, just like you've said, about 45% got hired. Fantastic. So if you can measure that on hard facts and numbers, with a kind of top and bottom line commercial elements, it's cost us so much per hire. People do still measure that, and it's still a lot of people talk about. We shouldn't be mentioning time to hire, cost per hire, but these are harsh commercial facts that we need to measure and track. Time to hire is more difficult because it's so variable across different levels of skill set. Including time to hire. Is it time to offer, time to hire? What's the best? So it's measuring all these things: time to hire, time to offer. Because if someone's got a 6-month notice period at a senior exec level position, your time to hire could be 12 months, couldn't it? Whereas, front end you can hire in a week, depending on the skill set. So time to hire, time to offer, important as well. But I think key in all of this is measuring those. Is sometimes that kind of softer measures that are more difficult to gather, and it's the engagement, feedback. I think feedback scores and gathering that from candidates, internal customers, if you like, your hiring managers, and including your in-house team, getting that feedback and analysis around how your agency or supply is performing. That I would personally put that as up there as equally important as the commercials. Because that feedback, because you may have the best commercials where it's like, oh, blooming hell, the cost of plummeted and this is happening, but then the feedback is they're terrible to work with, can't engage with them. They're aggressive. The candidates hate them, but they're pushing through because they need a job. It depends on that. So I think for me, you need to kind of keep that almost equal.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely just a reoccurring theme on all of the topics that we've touched on, and look, we could spend an entire podcast talking about one element of this around data reporting, around EVP, around each one of those. So we've kind of light touched everything, but there is definitely that theme of trust and engagement or communication. With those two basic elements, I think that elevates an agency TA relationship to a, as you said right at the get-go, kind of to a genuine partnership. And that's, if you want to have successful agency partners, they have to be engaged. They have to feel like they're getting value, and they have to be trusted to go away and do their work. Just make sure that everything that they're doing is on message. They're producing data, and they are kind of on your side. I think that's kind of, for me, that's a neat little summary. Is there anything else that you would add into that?
No, I think you summarised that fantastically well, and it's just like the key points that were covered there. It's that trust, it's that partnership, communication. But I think that it's still slightly subjective as well, because the things that we're talking about and having that supply needs to be scalable. So if you're looking at massive hundreds of thousands people-sized organisation, that's a different thing to deal with in terms of if you're like you say an SME, a small organisation, maybe a few hundred people. If you don't hire a lot, or if you do, then that's a different issue. That's a different problem. But yeah, if that trust and communication that remains the same, regardless of the size of organisation that you're in. And then it comes back to those kind of the commercials around that. Make sure that you can actually benefit, both sides of that in terms of that relationship. Because it's, at the end of the day, it's a lovely thing. It's a beautiful thing to be good pals and partners and making it, but it needs to be viable in terms of common sense around the cash spent on this as well, because everybody needs to be successful on that front too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, thank you for taking some time to have a chat. I've really enjoyed that. So
likewise.
Put the world right again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll catch up again somewhere, sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.